Welcome to the Talking Poem Podcast. I'm your host, Charlie Green. On each episode, I invite someone to bring in any poem they'd like to talk about for any reason. We'll talk about what excites us, what engages us, maybe what frustrates us, and we'll see where the poem and the conversation turn. Then we'll also have a little bit of silliness and a poetry game later because I can't help myself. On today's episode, I'm absolutely delighted to have on John Cullen. John is a comedian, Canadian, curler, and caster, pod. He's the co-host of the podcast Block Party, which is one of my favorites, and the POD cast. And you can listen to his comedy albums Long Stories for No Reason from 2020 and Most Likely to Be a Comedian from 2017. And if you're a teacher or have ever taught, you'll especially enjoy Most Likely to Be a Comedian. John, thanks for being on the show.
Hey, thanks for having me, Charlie. This is going to be an interesting change from Block Party.
Yeah, I was thinking of saying something like, I don't know what the crossover is for Block Party fans and fans of this podcast.
Yeah, all of our fans are really stupid, so they might be. Although you're a fan, so
I'm pretty stupid. Well, this is the thing.
I mean, you're a professor at Cornell. I feel like you can't be that stupid.
Well, they lowered their standards. You know, it's they've increased enrollments. They just need more faculty. I will say, if you're someone who listens and you turn it off when we get to the stupidity, then Block Party is not for you. If you stick with it, it's much more likely it'll be for you. I didn't mention this in the intro, but you're also a substitute teacher.
Yeah.
And most American listeners, as you know, that means nothing. I substitute taught for like 4 days after college, and all I needed was a criminal background check and a negative TB test. Can you explain what you had to do to become a substitute teacher in Canada?
Yeah, Canada is totally different. So it is funny because, Americans do, like you said, treat substitute teaching like it is working at McDonald's, basically. So yeah, in Canada, in order to be a substitute teacher, you have to have a teaching degree. So there's two different ways you can get that. One is to do, your typical like bachelor's degree first, whether that's of arts or science or fine arts or whatever it happens to be. And then you do a full, usually it's a 1-year program. Some schools it's 2, but you get a Bachelor of Education. So I actually have 2 degrees, a Bachelor of Arts in English Literature, and then my B.Ed. And then some schools do offer just a Bachelor of Education, and it's like a 5-year program where sort of your BA or BSc or whatever is tied in with your education degree. So you're kind of learning all the stuff, but from a sort of teaching perspective the entire time that you're doing your degree, instead of just like 1 year of hard concentration on it at the end. But yeah, you can't be a teacher in Canada without that. And that includes substitute teaching. And a fun fact that a lot of Americans like to learn, and this is not true of every school district, but the school district that I just left, that I taught in for 13 years, I got paid the same as a regular teacher. So the way they do it is basically they say the school year is 180 days. So every day I would make 1/180th of a teacher's salary with my commensurate experience. And I also accrued seniority. So I worked my way up the pay ladder and accrued pension as well. So when you're a sub, you're actually like a true real teacher. You're just not in any one place for any length of time.
That's incredible. I have a PhD, and if I wanted to teach K through 12, I would have to go back and do all these certifications, maybe get another degree. And yet on the opposite end of the spectrum, I can be the sort of prison guard who sits in the class and has no power if I'm a substitute teacher.
Yeah, exactly.
So all right, today you've brought in one of the hits, Emily Dickinson's Because I Could Not Stop for Death. Any preface before I ask you to read it aloud?
Yeah. Is this like, does it make me lame to pick this one? I feel like I was a little concerned because I'm not super up on my modern poetry. And I feel like I'm guessing a lot of your guests want to seem like hip and cool and be like, oh, this is this modern poet you've never heard of, and I'm going to read one of their brilliant poems. And I'm like, hey, here's one of the all-time classics. I feel like I'm going to get judged by your listeners.
No, not for that. You won't get judged for that. I feel like,
okay.
So like sometimes it's been a poet I haven't heard of. And a couple times it's been, oh, I know this poet, but I don't know this poem. And then a couple times it's like, oh, Anne Sexton. Yeah, I read this poem in college and have reread it since. So it varies. This isn't about poetry. There is no cool factor.
Well, I guess that is true at the end of the day. I just, I just wanted to kind of seem like a literary hipster, and but I'm not, and I can't fake it. And it was just funny. Like when you said I had to pick a poem, I was like racking my brain, and it just, I don't know what it is, but there's just something about this poem. When I think of poetry, it's just like the opening line of this poem just hits me, and I'm like, I feel like I just kind of want to just do this poem. So
yeah. I'm actually very happy we're talking about this poem. I'll explain why in a little bit, but
okay.
You want to go ahead and read it?
Sure, yes. This is Because I Could Not Stop for Death by Emily Dickinson. Because I could not stop for death, he kindly stopped for me. The carriage held but just ourselves and immortality. We slowly drove, he knew no haste, and I had put away my labor and my leisure too for his civility. We passed the school where children strove at recess in the ring. We passed the fields of gazing grain. We passed the setting sun. Or rather, he passed us. The dews drew quivering and chill, for only gossamer my gown, my tippet only tulle. We paused before a house that seemed a swelling of the ground. The roof was scarcely visible, the cornice in the ground. Since then, 'tis centuries, and yet feels shorter than the day I first surmised the horses' heads were toward eternity.
Thank you. That's fantastic. I'll tell you why one of the reasons I'm really glad you chose this poem. I've never taught it. So
nice.
I've taught poetry on and off. And usually I think my assumption is that students have encountered this at some point before they get to college. And so I'm like, I'll do something a little less known by Emily Dickinson. I was also been a little scared of it. Which I know it sounds strange, but I felt for a long time I didn't have anything I could articulate about it. So, but I'm going to turn.
I kind of feel the same. It really is like, it's kind of one of those poems. Like it does kind of speak for itself in many ways. Like it is. I think especially as a teacher and a professor, I think you want to have some sort of revelation about something where you feel like I'm up here and I'm the genius, I'm the guy. And then like with this poem, it's basically so perfectly encapsulated in the first two lines that you're sort of like, oh, okay, well, I understand this immediately. I get what the theme is. I know what we're talking about. There's like not a great opportunity to have some kind of like keen insight. And also because, it has been covered and written about so often. But there's just something about those first two lines. They're the most iconic like poetry lines for me in terms of like all the poems I've ever studied, ever taught, whatever. Like it's perfect, right? Like those first two lines are perfect.
Yeah, and it's so funny. I think that people think of Emily Dickinson as, this odd loner who never left the house. And yet this is so funny. He kindly stopped for me. I had put away my labor and my leisure too. She's like weirdly formal, and the language is all about these manners. And so it's off-putting in a good way. Like it doesn't have that overtone, even though it's mentioning death and immortality. It doesn't have this dull undertone of like sorrow and loss and anything.
No, and it's funny, like even reading it, because I didn't know that I was going to read it. And if I had known, I would have picked something that would have made this podcast an hour. I would have read like The Wasteland or something where we could have just been here for the super 10-hour, the 10-hour supercut of the
Book
talking
12
poem.
of the Odyssey.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, it's funny how I hadn't really thought about reading it. And you do, because of the iambic pentameter, you're or not even pentameter, I don't think, but the iambs, you like read it kind of sing-songy, even though it's like not like it's a sorrowful poem, but it is really hard not to, especially in the first stanza where she rhymes me and immortality, you kind of see that coming, and then you're like, oh, okay, so this is a sort of like, I'm reading all the iambs exactly, and it gets this like sing-songy tone, but it's not. Yeah, like you said, it's a sorrowful poem, but I think that's kind of almost what gives it sort of this different feel. It doesn't feel like really drudgy, funereal type thing, because it's so hard when you're reading it not to just kind of get into the like da 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 da.
But then it does, like the rhythm is very much that way, as a lot of her poems are. But then it gets weirdly off kilter, like her rhymes like away and civility, ring and sun. chill and Tool. It's just there's always something at the end of her stanzas that's intentionally, and I like, it's just a little off. It's kind of, I don't know, this is not a good comparison probably, but like in a horror movie when there's one of those music boxes playing and it's it's like it starts and then it slows down and the notes change.
Do 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 do. Yeah, no, you're right. And like I think too, especially because she does the true rhyme in the first stanza, then you're immediately like, oh, okay, I get what this is. It's rhyming on 2 and 4.
Yeah.
And then you get right to the second one and you're right. Like civility, especially as a word, not only does it not rhyme with away, but just the like for my labor and leisure too, for his civility. Like it's just not a great word to say. Like it does put that kind of like stop on it when you're reading it. And then you're like, oh, okay, it isn't just the like da 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 kind of like it is, but it's also she's trying to like screw with you a little bit in the way she does it. And it's funny because I think like when you're a kid, especially, you'd be reading this like for his civility, like you just like get in your mind, you're like, I think I need to rhyme this here. I need to pull like an Eminem or something and somehow make these words rhyme with the way I pronounce them.
Yeah, back when things are in black and white, they just talk that way,
Yeah, exactly. It's like when you teach, one of my favorite things, and this is maybe more of a high school thing, but I love when you teach Shakespeare and you're reading it aloud and you're having the kids read it aloud and it's just a regular English word, but they're so stuck in like this Shakespearean language that they'll just say it super weird. And you're like, no, it's the word we use right now. It's not like even like quivering, like quivering in this poem. I'm just looking at they'd be like, and the dews drew quivering, and you're like, no, it's just quivering. That's just the regular word.
Yeah, it's always a little unsettling when a 15-year-old says again.
Yeah, yes, totally.
And it's weird, like the word choices are so super, like immortality, civility, and eternity are words at the end of stanzas, and it's just they're surprising choices. Like they're difficult words, and they're kind of heavy and portentous at the same, but also just like an immortality for his civility. They're, like you said, they're kind of surprising words. They're the sort of big, like, I don't know, timpani hitting words, like telling us this is in a way essential and important.
Yeah, even though like Tool is not really, but then In the Ground is the other one. And then like obviously there's the thought that maybe this poem's not finished with the sort of with the M dash after eternity. Is it on purpose? Is it because she was trying to illustrate like eternity? It's just this kind of long dash, we don't know, but it is interesting to wonder, like, is this complete? Is there more of this? Because you're right, it does feel like a sudden ending, but then again, maybe that's the point.
Yeah, I think so. I like that reading with the M dash at the end, that it's just ongoing, like immortality and eternity. But I have a question about the last two stanzas, and I always do a little prep by reading a little what people have written about the poem, and I'd never really realized this. So the last two stanzas, we paused before a house that seemed a swelling of the ground. The roof was scarcely visible, the cornice and the ground. Since then, 'tis centuries, and yet feels shorter than the day I first surmised the horses' heads were toward eternity. Pardon me for my mispronunciation the first time.
Yes, please get it straight, Charlie.
So there are people who read it. I've read it that she is in the ground. Like the last stanza, she's in the ground. She's waiting for eternity. Time is no longer a thing that she measures in that way. But there are people who read it as if she's not, as if she's sort of still traveling or still in the carriage because of the we paused before a house.
Yes.
What do you think?
I don't think I've read it as her being in the ground. I think because I think of like the horses' heads, and then that gets me thinking of like the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, and I think it does, and that could be not related at all, but it just like that's the mental image that I conjure. So it does make me think that the way that I always kind of read that last part, and again where it does sort of feel, I think this is why I do feel the poem is finished, is because it seems like I mean, well, I guess maybe not. Like maybe there is a sense that she was going to actually write about the afterlife or whatever. But I think it's, to me, I sort of read it as like she's confused. And I think like the Grim Reaper, or the idea of like death having an embodiment, is often associated with confusion, right? It's like, oh, I see the Grim Reaper, I'm about to die, what's going to happen to me? Which I think is still, we're confused about what's going to happen when we die.
Mm-hmm.
But I read it as the sort of like, yeah, she's in the back of the carriage with maybe other people who are bound to die as well. The Grim Reaper's kind of like, steering the carriage. And then she has some kind of realization of, oh, I'm dead. Like that's kind of how I read it, where I read it as she hasn't figured out she's dead, or the speaker is like seeing, oh, the horses' heads are pointed towards eternity. I'm dead. Oh shit. Like that to me seems to be the reading that I have always had of it. Is it kind of goes along with, like I said, that mythos of the Grim Reaper or of death, where there is this initial state of confusion. Oh, I'm dead. Oh, damn.
The only reason I kind of, or not disagree, but at least I think I'm sticking with her being in the ground, or I want to, is the last line. It's not, I first surmised the horses' heads are toward eternity. It's were toward eternity. Right. And so that makes me imagine that this is, in a way, she's just remembering rather than being in the moment.
Right.
But it is,
so you think she's like remembering the day she died in this poem?
Yeah, that's how I read it. That, because she understands 'tis centuries and yet feels shorter than the day. She understands in some way that she's dead. I mean, it is that moment of revelation in a way, but also, well, I don't know. It's because the way it's that we paused before a house. It's not we stopped. They stopped to inter me. It's a strange thing. Like we're very clearly in a carriage for most of the poem, and then at the end, it's mysterious. I don't know where we are.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you're right. Like the use of the past tense there is interesting, but I also think in that sense, though, you could, like, this is all in the past tense, right? It's like past, pause, like, so I still think it could be she's just realizing this now, like, oh, I realized, but she's still in the carriage, like she's still going towards wherever she's going. She's just realizing, like, oh, they're pointed there. Dang. But you're right, though. Like I think it's interesting to think about the idea that she's buried in the ground this whole poem and is like remembering her death day or whatever. I do think that's an interesting idea that I hadn't really thought of, to be honest. I think I've just, like I said, always had this picture of this sort of carriage ride towards death.
And maybe I'm just, my assumption is she's being buried because they stop at the cemetery. And of course, I love that rather than saying grave, something I really love about her, all her poems, is then she'll just decide not to name something, but describe it in a way that's so strange that we have to kind of see it the way she does in this totally new light. A house that seemed a swelling of the ground. The roof was scarcely visible, the cornice in the ground. She's not saying gravesite. She's not saying tomb. It's this, we sort of see it come together in that weird way. And maybe that's another thing that's creating the uncertainty, is that we don't know that that's where she stops.
Yeah. And I like the idea that, the gravestone, the swelling of the ground is almost like an extension of her in a way, kind of saying like, oh, it's, I'm dead, I'm down here. And it's sort of like this little piece of me is like swelling up, above the ground. Like, yeah, it's a cool thing. And I think, yeah, it is. There are different moments in this where the way she's describing it, again, I think it gives it almost a more wistful tone than a somber tone, because of the way that she's, yeah, it's not just like, and then they put me in the ground and I'm at a cemetery. Like there is there's almost like this hopeful, even the way like we pass the school is vibrant. It's not, we passed the school and all the doors were closed and we heard the haunting screams of children who used to play there or whatever. It's like, no, we passed the school and the children are playing in the ring at recess, and you can like almost hear the children singing as they're playing like Ring Around the Rosie or whatever. There's just a lot of stuff put in here that seems very purposeful to give the poem a somber or, like I said, funereal kind of reading.
But you're right, it is wistful. And it's like we passed the school where children strove. Strove is just such a strange word to imagine children striving. At recess in the ring, we passed the fields of gazing grain. We passed the setting sun. And that's, for me, that's where the wistfulness starts. And then, or rather, he passed us. And then the dews grew quivering and chill. Then the tone at least evokes a little bit of that sense of loss. But it's just a little bit. And so that wistfulness kind of carries through.
Yeah, even just like wearing a gown, like a tulle gown, and like you get this sense of, or at least for me anyway, when I'm reading it, I'm thinking of it as a kind of angelic type, like gossamer tulle. Like we're thinking of fabrics that are, they're not typically, or what I'm not imagining her in this sort of like black deathly dress or whatever. It again feels like I'm kind of like beautiful in passing.
Yeah, I like that too. The gossamer gown tippet tulle. It's just, there's something very, very delicate about it without feeling funereal.
Yeah, totally.
So have you taught this poem before? I'm assuming you have.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. Like, I think I have. It's hard when you're a substitute teacher to kind of keep track of everything you've ever done, but I do think I have taught it before. This would be a poem you probably wouldn't teach to a regular, for lack of a better word, English class. Like this is probably a more like an AP English or an IB English. So yeah, but I have done quite a bit of subbing in both AP and IB. So I believe I have taught it. I know for sure I read it in university. If I taught it, and I probably did, I don't have any specific memories of doing that.
It's funny. This is random, but the other day I was listening to some podcast and somebody offhand mentioned being in the gifted program, and I thought, yeah, I was in the gifted program too, which basically means your parents went to college. And and if you're in the regular classes, they keep all the interesting things away from you. Like you don't get to read Emily Dickinson because we don't think you're smart enough.
Yeah, I was in the gifted program as well. And in my school district, they made me go to a different school. So it was really like they had a magnet school program. So we were in school with the regular, quote unquote, regular, whatever you want to call them, non-gifted kids. That was one of the things on Block Party. I mean, we've done almost 260 episodes that got like the most attention from people is when I used to talk about how at recess we would play soccer or football or whatever, and we would play gifted versus non-gifted. And that that was just how we divided the teams. And people always have some kind of weird reaction to that. And like, I just never thought about it in the moment. It just seemed like a fair, like we'd probably usually have about even numbers on both sides. There were good athletes in the gifted program, contrary maybe to popular belief. And so, so it was like this weird, like I never thought of it as weird, but I brought that up on Block Party once and people had a very strange reaction to that. Like, oh, you divided it up like that? Okay.
That is funny. So I went to magnet schools, my brothers and I did. And so in Little Rock, Arkansas, there were a lot of poor schools. And so a lot of them in minority communities were converted to magnet schools so they could get money from the county. Students from the county would get bused there. And, when I was a kid that age, I thought, oh, yeah, these are fairly integrated schools. And the more I look back, the more it's like the gifted and regular classes were also kind of segregated.
Right.
Which is
super weird.
Yeah, very, very weird. So
especially when you think of it from a like funding perspective, right? Where it's like, oh, we gotta bring the white kids here so we can get money. Like it's just even thinking about it on those lines, you're like, oh, I don't. But I'm sure, like you said, at the time, you're probably just like, oh yeah, like our school is a bit of a melting pot kind of situation. This is great. And then you look back and you're like, oh, actually, shoot, I don't feel great about that.
Yeah, that was weird. That was unsettling. Always unsettling, especially when you're from Arkansas, to look back at your past.
Yeah, that's maybe the context there is a little bit more fraught.
So one last thing I wanted to do is share a poem that actually I thought of, that I actually teach this poem all the time, that I think of now because I could not stop for death. Have you read anything by a Serbian American poet named Charles Simic?
No.
This is great. This is sort of not the person being taken by death, but the poem about death the person. This is called Eyes Fastened with Pins. How much death works, no one knows what a long day he puts in. The little wife always alone, ironing death's laundry. The beautiful daughters setting death's supper table. The neighbors playing pinochle in the backyard or just sitting on the steps drinking beer. Death, meanwhile, in a strange part of town looking for someone with a bad cough, but the address is somehow wrong. Even death can't figure it out among all the locked doors. And the rain beginning to fall. Long, windy night ahead. Death with not even a newspaper to cover his head, not even a dime to call the one pining away, undressing slowly, sleepily, and stretching naked on death's side of the bed.
Yeah, that's really funny. I like, well, not funny, but it's kind of funny. The line of like, death screws it up a lot is like a very, that's really funny and like true, right? Like there's a lot of people where it's like, well, you're gonna die, and then they don't. I agree, like kind of a fun counterpoint to this sort of image of, and I think especially like era wise, like I'm guessing you said that's a more modern poem, right?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah,
I
so
think
it's like
1980. No, 1999.
Oh, yeah. Perfect. Okay. So, I think that's the other thing too, is, when you are thinking of Emily Dickinson, you're thinking of the time period she wrote in, you're thinking of this sort of pop culture vision we have of the Grim Reaper or of death or whatever. So it is kind of an interesting, contrast to that of, it seems a little bit more of a modern Revolutionary Road type death guy who's like, yeah, I have a cool wife and nice daughters and like this job is hell and whatever, I liked it. It's great.
It's unsettling in the way that the Dickinson poem is unsettling, in that it's the first time I read it, I didn't know exactly how to react. I just knew I was hit by it. And there are different things that go into it. Most of it, I think, is not only just death being personified in this way. He's like Willie Loman,
yes, totally
sad sack loser in a way. But also it's almost none of it is sentences. It's all like sentence fragments. And so it feels off kilter in the way that she kind of does, but totally different means. Anything else you wanted to say about the Dickinson poem before we turn to the silliness?
No, I don't think so. I just, like I said off the top, sometimes the classics are classics for a reason. And I genuinely think the opening two lines of the poem are probably the most impactful lines of poetry I've ever read. And not even in a like it profoundly affected my life, but just like the way it's written is just is perfect. And it's a great poem.
Yeah, it's so unique and so specific to her. So
totally.
Before we turn to the poetry game, we do have an ad appropriate to your visit. This week's episode is brought to you by the Canadian Tourism Board, which invites Americans to come to Canada to compete in the annual competition for American visitors. They shoot poets, don't they? The premise is simple. Americans are asked to name 3 Canadian poets. The first to name 3 wins a bag full of loonies. Up to now, no American competitor has ever named 3 Canadian poets. They usually name Margaret Atwood and Anne Carson, then get stuck. But every competition must have a winner. So after everyone has named 2 poets and can't come up with a third, it becomes a dance marathon competition. The last couple standing then compete one-on-one until one falls unconscious. They shoot poets, don't they? Do you?
I mean, honestly, like I'm trying to think if I can name 3 Canadian poets. Like Canada is so bad at all that stuff. Like we're so bad. We like, I work in entertainment as a comedian. We don't have a star system here. Like we're so bad at producing famous people. We're really bad at producing artists. Like we're musicians. Like we're just bad at everything. So it is funny. Like you said that. I'm like, do I know 3 Canadian poets? Like obviously, Atwood came to mind first. Then the second one that came to my mind was Leonard Cohen, just because he wrote a lot of like books of poetry, but I don't think we think of him as like a traditional poet. And then I'm like, oh my God, who is it? And then you said Anne Carson. I was like, okay, yeah, I would have got there probably. But it is like I've read lots of Canadian poets, but we just don't have this sort of like iconic classic poets where you remember. And I think it's partly that we're a Commonwealth country too. So we're like, oh, look at all these amazing British poets from the 16 to 1900s. Let's just study them.
So was there any studying of Canadian literature for your degree, or was it just English literature, American literature?
Yeah, I went to UBC, the University of British Columbia, which is a very good and well-regarded school, but the English degree was very loose. Like you could really just kind of take sort of whatever you wanted, but there was a Canadian education requirement, or sorry, a Canadian literature requirement. And so I think you had to take 2 courses that were focused on Canadian literature, and I took one that was sex in Canadian literature. And it was great because the teacher of the class was, and this is, probably the year 2000 or 2001. Or no, sorry. I graduated in 2003 from high school. Sorry. So like 2004, 2005. And the teacher was like a very flamboyant gay man, which in 2005, that was a little bit of for me coming from a small town, that was a little bit of a like, okay. And he had, as so often professors do, he had edited the anthology that we studied in the class. And the anthology was called Sexing the Maple. And I thought that was a pretty great title for it. And yeah, we studied a lot about sex in Canadian literature. It had a very heavy Marshall McLuhan focus. And wow. It was a very cool class. I feel like I learned a lot, other than what the names of the poets were of the poems that we read.
Yeah, I have classes like that where I don't remember any of the content, but I could tell you a million things about the teachers and the other people in the class.
100%. There was a girl in that class that this was in the very early days of Facebook, where you had to have a university email address to get on Facebook. And I remember when it first came to UBC, and it was this big thing. And back in the day, because it was university focused, you could put your classes into Facebook. So you would say like, okay, I'm taking this.
Right.
Yes, it's like, oh, I'm taking this class in this section or whatever. And then you could see all the other people in your class. So it was actually a great way to meet girls, because you'd see them in your class. You'd be like, oh, that's a hot girl I've identified from across the room. I would like to sit beside her. Maybe I'll add her as a friend or whatever. So I remember there was this girl in that Sexing the Maple class that I thought was very cute. And we ended up talking on Facebook quite a bit, and we agreed to sit together. And then it was the only time in history that she had just the most crazy voice I've ever heard, where it immediately turned me off. I don't know what it was, but it was just like, she just had this, and that's like what I remember most about that class, is like, it's probably the only time in history I have went from like, oh, this girl's really cute, to like, no, I'm not interested because of her voice, which is, I realize, petty and whatever, but that's what I remember about Sexing the Maple.
Education's strange.
It is, isn't it?
Speaking of education, John Cullen, trivia buff, Jeopardy fan, are you ready to play a game?
Let's play a game, baby.
All right. Today we're playing a game I'm calling Who Didn't Start the Fire? So I assume that you and most listeners are familiar with Billy Joel's 1989 hit, We Didn't Start the Fire.
I am familiar, yes.
So I assume that but I imagine, well, I hope for their sake, a lot of listeners have not heard of or heard the Fall Out Boy remake of We Didn't Start the Fire.
I think I have heard it.
I read the lyrics and then heard it by accident. And I have to say, I'm going to read just the first little verse here so people can get a taste of it. Read the lyrics, forget about it, listen to it later, because the ridiculousness of the lyrics is even better when you hear them and you're paying attention. So here are the opening lyrics. Should I sing these? Captain Planet, Arab Spring, LA riots, Rodney King, deep fakes, earthquakes, Iceland volcano, Oklahoma.
Iceland volcano.
Yeah.
Wow. You can tell that was written in the 2 months that was a thing that we cared about.
Oklahoma City bomb, Kurt Cobain, Pokemon, Tiger Woods, MySpace, Monsanto GMOs. I got the rhythm there on the long thing, but I gotta say, Oklahoma City bomb to Kurt Cobain to Pokemon, that's chef's kiss. That's
pretty genius. I also love that they're really going for, and I know that the Billy Joel version did this a little bit too, but just like the juxtaposition of Captain Planet and Rodney King, like they're sitting down to write the lyrics. They're like, okay, so what happened in the 90s? Okay, there's these Arab Spring, like these like all these horrible events. Oh, Captain Planet was sick though.
Yeah, this is when I finally succumb to dementia. This is like my stream of consciousness. It's just remembering, oh yeah, the Oklahoma City bombing, Kurt Cobain, Pokemon. Yeah. I recommend, as I said, everybody should read the lyrics. But did you know that Billy Joel was riding a long tradition of bards and poets? In this game, who didn't start the fire? I'm going to read you the very totally real lyrics from previous versions of We Didn't Start the Fire, and you'll tell me who you think wrote it.
Okay.
And I will sing this despite my obviously not.
So
great
these
voice.
are I'm trying to name musicians here, or these are poets.
These are poets.
Okay.
Yeah. So number 1, I met a little cottage girl, Tintern Abbey's windowsills, lonely clouds, untrodden ways, Samuel Coleridge.
Okay, Tintern Abbey was Wordsworth?
That is Wordsworth.
Ooh.
1 for 1.
Woo. Okay, good. I'm glad I got 1 point on the board. When you said it was going to be poets, I was like, oh boy, I could be in some trouble here. Okay. Phew,
yeah,
right.
I'm still figuring out like the right the right difficulty level. By the way,
yeah.
As a bonus, he has a perfect title for The World Is Too Much With Us. Okay, number 2. Arise and go to Innisfree. I've met them at the close of day. Those I fight, I do not hate. No country for old men.
Oh, yeah. Innisfree. No Country for Old Men is Cormac McCarthy, but he is not a poet. Who was Innisfree? Is it Shelley?
No, it's W.B. Yeats.
Yeats.
Yeah. The No Country for Old Men.
Not even the right time.
Well, it's the right part of the world, sort of. I mean, just kind of generally.
Sort of, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, sort of, but in another way, Yeats would be very upset if he heard you say that.
Well, he can't hear us. They don't have podcasts in heaven.
That's true. Is Yeats in heaven? It's a great question.
Yeah, we'll say so. All right, number 3. Death is proud, you ravish me, a little world made cunningly. Suck our blood, you little, flee the canonization. I can always sing again if you'd like.
What was the first line again?
Death is proud, you ravish me.
Death is proud. Death be not proud. Oh, God. This is like, I should have studied before this.
You didn't know you were going to read the poem. You didn't know that the
I did. No, you did tell me about the game. You did tell me about the game. It's on me. It's on me for not studying. Death be not proud. Oh, God. It's not Dylan Thomas, is it?
No, it's John Donne. But I see why you got to Dylan Thomas.
Yes, I know. And Donne was also in my mind. Because we did actually in IB English 12. I don't know. Do you know what IB is?
It's International Baccalaureate, but I don't actually know what that means.
Yeah. So basically what it means is, I'll try to say it quickly, but basically there's 2 streams. There's the diploma and the certificate. So the diploma starts in grade 11 and you have to take 11th grade for your American listeners. I know when I say grade 11, they're like, what is he talking about? So yeah. So what it is it's a, the diploma basically is a set schedule of classes that you take in grade 11 and grade 12. And then the certificate is you can just pick and choose what classes to take. Okay. And then they have standard level and higher level. So the diploma, you take standard level for the classes you're not very good at. So like if you're doing a humanities diploma, then you would probably do like biology standard level, math standard level, whatever. And then you do like English, history, geography, higher level. And then what it is when you take the higher level courses, they go all year in grade 12. And if you get a certain score on the IB exams, you get first year credit at university. So essentially the first in my school was semestered, 2 semesters. So the first semester was supposed to be the equivalent of grade 12 English, and the second semester was the equivalent of first year university English.
Gotcha.
And then for whatever reason, my teacher of higher level English, we did a bunch of different books and plays. And then instead of doing like a survey of poetry, we just studied John Donne. So I should have got that, but I really checked out. We did poetry last and our IB exams were already over. You do them in like April. So I was just like, my mind was checked out, but yes.
Totally. Well, I feel like I've said this before, but I kind of get to feel like Alex Trebek doing the games. And I just wish sometimes, he would have said, I didn't know that. He just looks as if he has all this knowledge at his disposal. And
well, it's funny with Ken hosting now because you do genuinely think he knows them all.
Yeah.
So it's even funnier with Ken, like, because he actually had one the other game where I was so surprised because Alex never did this, but there was a triple stumper, which is when none of the contestants get it right. And then Ken actually said, yeah, I didn't know that one either. It's blank. And it was like sort of an acknowledgement of like, nah, I know most of these. And I was surprised by this question because I didn't know the answer.
Yeah, it would be great if sometimes someone gets the right answer and Trebek says, oh, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. Oh, I see how you got there. That's good.
Yeah. All right. I have two more for you.
Okay.
One is 20th century and then the last one is 19th century. So number 4. Now I'm going to skip number 4 because I tried singing it earlier and it doesn't fit. Just one more then. Okay. 19th century.
Okay.
I was just looking at it and realizing I've been singing these. And I do have part of the chorus here for you.
Okay.
Glory be for dappled things, a warm breast and wild bright wings, the mastery of the thing you mourn for, Margaret. Kingfishers catching fire. I've just created this so I can be talking to somebody else instead of talking to myself at home.
That was really good. Kingfisher. Is that Keats?
No, that is Gerard Manley Hopkins.
Oh, I would have never got that.
I think that I'm pulling from so many disparate things, like different poems that it's just like it's a weird mishmash. So, John,
whatever. I got
you.
one. I was happy to get one.
It's better than several people have done, and it's better than I would have done on most of these. So, you're on the leaderboard.
Yes.
Oh, Canada. You would get to hear that with your medal. Thank you so much for being here. Anything you would like to plug?
Thank you so much for having me. This has been a fun experience. I feel like I got to sound mildly intelligent on a podcast as opposed to the alternative, which is nice. But you were you were very nice in the plugs off the top. But yes, I have a podcast called Blocked Party, which is where myself and Stefan Heck, who you may know from the internet as @boringasheck on Twitter, we have a guest on every week to talk about a time they got blocked on social media. It's a very fun show. It's been going for almost 5 years. We've had some great guests on the show: Tony Hawk, Ike Barinholtz, Nikki Glazer, Jamel Hill. Lots of great guests. I think we had a poet on too, right? That
is why I thought of you. You had a Canadian poet on whose name you can't remember as you're trying to list Canadian poets.
Who the hell was the Canadian poet we had on?
I forgot to check his name. It was a while back.
Shane Koyczan, of course. Of course. How could I forget Shane Koyczan, Canada's finest slam poet? Shane. He's amazing. If you don't know Shane, check out his work. Shane Koyczan, incredible performer and poet. You're right. I should have got that when I was thinking of 3 Canadian poets. My friend Shane.
I'll tag him in this, even though I don't know him, so he can be angry.
Yeah, and if you're not familiar with his work, he's so great and really, like, I know that teaching slam poetry is what it is, but he's a really great example of a fantastic slam poet. Anyway, Blocked Party. It's at Blocked Party Pod. You can find it wherever you get your podcasts. And, a lot of people do say nu metal is poetry. And so if you are one of those people, I have a podcast called the POD Cast with Brian Quinby. We review a classic nu metal album every month. If you don't know what nu metal is, think like Korn, Limp Bizkit, Deftones, that kind of late 90s, early aughts rock phase. It's super fun. And then, if you want to check out me and my comedy, you can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Cullen the Comic. And as you said, I have a couple albums out. They're available wherever you get your music.
Thank you. And what is I Did It All for the Nookie, if not a Shakespearean sonnet in contemporary language?
No question. Absolutely. Yeah. It is pretty much, it's basically an unpublished love sonnet by Shakespeare. So.
Exactly. And it's not in the folio. Well, thanks,
How do
everybody.
I love thee? Let me count the ways, which is not Shakespearean, but also it is it's like a combo of Shakespeare and Barrett Browning. So.
Exactly. Well, thanks everybody for listening. Have a great day. Go read some poems, pet some dogs, and support striking workers wherever you find them. Bye.